Illinois lawmakers returned to the Statehouse this week amid a partial shutdown of the federal government and continuing tension with the Trump administration over aggressive immigration enforcement practices. We'll talk about those stories and more on this edition of Capitol Cast. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Capitol Cast, a regular podcast of Capitol News Illinois. I'm Peter Hancock, and I'm here today with my colleagues Ben Szalinski and Brenden Moore. A lot of news this week, guys, so let's start with what's been happening at the Statehouse. The fall veto session officially got underway this week, but the attention did not seem focused on discussing legislative vetoes or passing any new legislation. Let's hear from Illinois House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch talking to reporters on day 2 of the session.
So in these 6 days of session, we're going to talk about what needs to be done to protect affordable transit. We're going to talk about what we can do to rein in utility costs. We're going to talk about how we mitigate the damage of the big BS bill. But we're also going to talk about the state of our democracy, because people across Illinois are terrified that our democracy is slipping away.
So, Brenden, let's start with you. We just launched a 6-day veto session. Half of those days are now already gone. Has anything happened? We heard the speaker there talk about some issues that they wanted to discuss. Anything happening? Is anything moving?
Well, Peter, there was one bill that did pass that would allow additional weight allowances for vehicles using natural gas, propane, electric battery, and hydrogen fuel systems. So there's that. But besides that, not a lot. The House Democrats, as the speaker alluded to, did talk a lot about democracy this week. They passed a series of resolutions basically stating their strongly worded opposition to various aspects of President Trump's policies and actions of ICE agents in Chicago. But in terms of legislation moving on some of the big items, that really didn't happen. And we've seen that in past veto sessions where lawmakers come in, they haven't seen each other in several months, so they catch up, they caucused a few times, and they kind of set a game plan of sorts for the second week of veto session when we really could start to see some of the bigger items move. So that would be reform and funding of Chicago area public transit agencies and funding for the rest of the state's transit agencies, a reform, an energy bill that would try to address battery storage and get more capacity on the grid to address rising prices and reliability issues. And then there was also some talk about can there be a meaningful legislative response to some of the ICE raids going on in the Chicago region over the past month? There hasn't been a package that has been introduced yet, but there are some ideas floating around, and I'm sure those are all going to be at least discussed, and some of those issues may get some action in the second week of veto session. But yeah, this week it was pretty quiet. The Senate canceled their on Thursday. The House is in very briefly. So just kind of a setting the table week for when they come back in a couple of weeks.
Okay, yeah, so they are off this coming week, and then will return that last week of October. We are recording this on Friday, October 17th, and as we sit here, there are large protests being planned in Springfield, throughout the state of Illinois, in Chicago, and actually nationwide, I guess. This is part of the No Kings protest movement that has been going on for a while. Brenden, you plan to be out there this weekend, at least at the Springfield protest. What are you expecting, and what seems to be different about this weekend than all the other weekends that these demonstrations have been going on?
I'm expecting a very large crowd in Chicago. I'll be in Springfield, probably get several hundred people out here. I expect millions of people nationwide will be at these No Kings protests. And there was a big one back in, I believe it was in June or early July, the same day of the military parade in Washington. That was probably the biggest one of the second Trump term. But in general, we haven't seen the same level of resistance in Trump 2 versus Trump 1. There hasn't been like the same type of social movement like we saw with like the Women's March and some of the other protests when Trump first came into office. But I think that's changing, and I think what's different now, especially in these past few months, is the some of the actions that we've seen from the administration, whether that is uh, these aggressive ICE raids that have been taking place, I mean, across the country, but especially in the Chicago region. I think that the images and the videos of these interactions that often escalate, often turn violent, do not portray federal agents in a very positive light. I think that is having an impact. Uh, Obviously, we also are people are also kind of grappling with the militarization of American cities, namely Chicago, Los Angeles, Portland, where the president would like to deploy troops, whether for fighting crime or helping ICE agents carry out their duties, protecting federal facilities, and then we see the prosecutions of some of the president's political opponents. We've seen indictments in recent weeks of former FBI Director Jim Comey, New York Attorney General Tish James, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton, and those only happened after the president explicitly called for them to be prosecuted. So I think we're starting to see people. And also, I should mention Jimmy Kimmel, and that happened too. Where he was off the air for a week when after he told a joke about Charlie Kirk, and so I think that this rally is coming at a time. These protests are coming at a time when we've just seen kind of this. Kind of a flurry of actions coming from the administration that I think have finally started to spur Democrats and maybe some progressives to I guess maybe channel their energy in the way they did in the first Trump term.
Okay, so I get in the midst of all of that. I mean, these have been just amazing stories to watch unfold in front of our eyes. It almost seems kind of trivial to talk about the issues that are still confronting the state and ostensibly the reason why legislators ought to be back in session right now. But Ben, did want to turn to you. We do have issues at the state. There are things facing the legislature. And we did hear Speaker Welch in that soundbite earlier talk about some of them, including mass transit reform. And we've talked about that several times on this podcast. The fact that the Chicago area mass transit system is facing a fiscal cliff, although the size of the cliff seems to be shrinking as time goes on, and the deadline for hitting that cliff seems to be getting pushed back. Can you catch us up? Where are we now on the fiscal cliff for mass transit, and is there any chance that the legislature actually is going to do anything about it during this fall veto session?
Yeah, we're really in the same place we were a couple of weeks ago on this issue. I don't think the needle really moved a whole lot here in the first week of session. Really, the only thing that has actually changed since lawmakers were even last in Springfield in May was that the RTA, the governing board for these transit agencies in the Chicago area,
the Regional Transit Authority.
Yeah, the group released some new projections on October 3rd that did what you mentioned there. It shows that the fiscal cliff won't really hit until probably around July of 2026, Lawmakers were kind of originally under the impression it was going to start at the beginning of 2026. We won't see the full size of that cliff, the 700 to $800 million revenue shortfall for these transit agencies until 2027. So, in some ways, lawmakers have kind of just, I guess you could say, are ignoring some of the timeline as far as just how much they trust it. State lawmakers have a lot of trust issues with RTA leadership as it is. So they're taking it under advisement, but I don't think it's really changed how they're approaching the issue. I think they want to get something done here in the second week of veto session because this issue has been on their plates for well over a year at this point. So I'm not really sure if it's realistic still to expect that it will get done. They only have 3 more days left. It still seemed to me last week that there was a pretty good degree of separation among a lot of lawmakers, Democrats included, about how this issue should be addressed. The big hangup here is the funding for it. And, there has to be tax increases or new taxes to even make up the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be required to properly fund public transportation in the Chicago area. And those are not easy votes. We do have an election that lawmakers are facing next year. And, they are going to be going in front of their primary voters here in March. So, taking votes that could raise taxes on deliveries that they get from Amazon to their house, increasing a sales tax or something like that. Those are very hard for lawmakers to take. And I think they're really struggling to figure out which ones they're willing to support because the big issue that I think everyone is going to be voting on this year, maybe in addition to these issues around democracy and the future of the country, is the economy and the cost of living that people currently face. So I think it's a very challenging situation for lawmakers, and getting 78 House Democrats to come to an agreement on anything is challenging, especially something like this where there's going to be a lot of consequences for the decisions that they make.
Well, as you mentioned, none of those funding proposals are going to be popular. Tax increases are never popular, especially as you're approaching an election. Also unpopular, though, is when the trains stop running and when buses stop coming by your intersection and when services are cut. You talked about, it's going to take hundreds of millions of dollars to get through this crisis. But it seems like a lot of lawmakers have been saying, don't ask me for the money until you get your own house in order, that there has to be some sort of organizational reform of the whole transit authority, the governing boards that pull all of these agencies together. Where do we stand on that? I mean, that seems to be step one, is you have to reform the organizational structure before you start pumping new money into it. So where do we stand on that kind of reform?
Yeah, I think the one thing we know is that lawmakers are going to pass a bill that includes both those structural reforms and the funding for it. They don't think it should be tackled separately. They think it has to come together because otherwise we're just going to be fighting this issue for forever, essentially. So really, it seems that they have reached an agreement, or they've reached the path forward, I think is probably the more appropriate term as far as the governing structure is going to go. There's going to be changes that would rename the RTA into the Northern Illinois Transit Agency. They would have a lot more power in overseeing CTA, Metro, and PACE, those other transit agencies in the area. They would be able to set fares across the board. They would take a more coordinating role as far as schedules go. So bus lines and train lines match up as far as their schedules, more of a leading role on capital projects and some infrastructure investments and how to actually combine these systems so people can effectively use them. We think there's going to be a change to the fare box requirement, which is a portion of state law that dictates how much revenue these transit agencies must make from fares. There's going to be some sort of public safety aspect to that, which was a little bit murky, in my opinion, in the spring session still. So that's kind of where we're at on that. I wouldn't say a lot of it is popular because the board that is going to make up this new transit agency is going to have a lot of representation from Cook County. The mayor of Chicago is going to get 5 appointees. The Cook County board president is going to get 5 appointees. And that is, half of the 20-member board that's going to be overseeing all this. And if the governor ends up, making appointees who reside in Cook County or Chicago, that further balances out the suburbs. So there's a lot of lawmakers, especially in the suburbs, who are a little bit worried that their representation as far as future decisions on public transit goes isn't going to be there. It's not going to be adequate. But I think lawmakers are kind of past that point in these conversations. Everything everyone is talking about is very strictly related to revenue.
Okay. Well, I do want to switch subjects now to the elections, which we just mentioned are kind of hanging over all of the discussions about mass transit and about other things. The 2026 elections are coming up. The primary elections are just a few months away. This week, candidates for both state and federal offices had to file their campaign finance reports, and this sort of gives us a little early look into who has financial support behind them, who are the really serious candidates, and who are also, just kind of the hangers-on. I want to start with you, Ben. You wrote about the race for governor. Of course, Democrat J.B. Pritzker is seeking re-election for a third term and doesn't face any real primary challenge on the Democratic side. What's happening on the Republican side? Several candidates over there. Who seems to be rising to the top, at least financially?
Yeah, so far the clear leader is Ted Dabrowski. He's a conservative researcher from the organization WirePoints. He managed to raise $1.5 million since he launched his campaign in August. Some of that was through self-funding, about $250,000. He got another $250,000 from Lake Forest billionaire Dick Uihlein, who has been really the only major fundraising source for Republicans the last couple years. So seeing his support behind Ted Dabrowski, I think, is pretty significant that there's going to be a pretty serious primary race here, specifically between Dabrowski and Darren Bailey. So the money story as far as Darren Bailey goes isn't really complete. He launched his campaign just 5 days before the end of the fundraising period. So we really can't judge him on that entirely at this point, but it is safe to say he's looking for money because Dick Uihlein did support Darren Bailey in the last election. So Darren's going to need to find a new source of money to, make it through this race. And if he wins the primary, especially to compete with J.B. Pritzker. But he comes into this race with a lot of high name recognition. Voters certainly remember who Darren Bailey is, and they don't know who Ted Dabrowski is. So that's part of where Dabrowski's money is going to be so important.
Okay, they remember who Darren Bailey is. They might also remember that he was the nominee in 2022, and he lost by double digits to J.B. Pritzker. How many people are going to be real anxious to bankroll him when he has that kind of a track record of barely even being competitive with the person who's going to be on the other side?
That's the problem, and I think that's why Dick Uihlein has moved his money over behind a different candidate. He wants to give somebody else a shot. The investment in Darren Bailey certainly did not pay off last time. He put in, I think it was $13 million into Darren Bailey's 2022 race, and he got trounced by basically $1 million per point he lost for. So, I think voters are probably also kind of considering that if they really want Darren Bailey. There's a couple other candidates who are running, the DuPage County Sheriff, a businessman from Lake Forest, an attorney from South Suburban Cook County. Neither of those three have really shown any viability at this point, especially when it comes to fundraising. So we're certainly looking at probably a two-person race, and we'll see if Darren can maybe change and refine his message to be more attractive to a wider variety of voters.
Okay. There's also an open race this year for the state comptroller. Democrat Susana Mendoza is stepping down. Who is the leading fundraiser in that competition?
Yeah, State Representative Margaret Croak is the leading fundraiser. She represents a lot of the near north side of Chicago. And she's coming into this race with kind of assumed support from JB Pritzker, who was not endorsed in this race, but there's certainly some signs and some ties that he is potentially going to support Margaret Croke's candidacy. He's up against or she's up against a number of other people. Karina Villa is probably the most fierce competitor that Representative Croke has right now. Villa is a state senator from suburban West Chicago, and she's raised a lot of money. She had a big viral moment as far as immigration goes, which it didn't really seem like that translated too much into the fundraising, but she's getting support from the Senate president here in Illinois. She's got also labor union support, just like Margaret Croke does. So it certainly is shaping up to be a very competitive race, probably the most competitive Democrat race we've really seen for a statewide office in quite some time, really since J.B. Pritzker's 2018 primary.
Okay. Brenden, let's talk a little bit on the federal side. The big race that everybody's watching this year, of course, is the U.S. Senate race to replace Democrat Dick Durbin, who's retiring. What stood out to you in those reports?
Yeah, Peter. So anybody that has watched television or streaming service in the past 3 months has gotten pretty familiar with Raja Krishnamurthy's face. He's the congressman from the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and he is one of the three leading Democrats seeking to replace Senator Durbin. So he raised $3.1 million last quarter, which is about on par for where he's been. He's easily the most prolific fundraiser in the race. But we also got I'm going to look behind the curtains, if you will, on how much he's actually spending on some of these ads. Weekly, it's about $450,000, which is a lot of money.
$500,000 a week to be on television this far out. The election's a year away.
Yeah, I mean the candidates haven't even filed their petitions to get on the ballot yet. The primaries in March, so he's getting a very big head start on getting his name recognition up and introducing himself to Democratic primary voters. But obviously he has some competition, namely in Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and Congresswoman Robin Kelly from the south suburbs of Chicago. So Lieutenant Governor Stratton raised $1 million and had about $920,000 on hand at the end of September. Congresswoman Kelly only raised about $280,000, but she had about $2 million in the bank that she's been able to roll over because she's been in Congress for over a decade. So Congressman Krishnamurthy has had the airwaves to himself. Neither Stratton or Kelly have run ads yet. Frankly, Stratton doesn't have enough money to run a big ad campaign. Kelly probably could, but it seems like she's saving up for when it gets closer to the election. Nobody's going to compete with Congressman Krishnamurthy in money. He has about $18 million in the bank still. That should sustain him, especially if he keeps fundraising until election day, will allow him to keep running these ads. One of the big wild cards here is going to be, does Governor J.B. Pritzker get involved and in a financial way to support his lieutenant governor? So he has endorsed Lieutenant Governor Stratton. Did it on the second day of her campaign, but so far he has not beyond a $7,000 contribution very early to her, directly to her campaign. He has not, at least has not been reported that he has given money to a political action committee that is supporting Lieutenant Governor Stratton. One did launch last month, Blue Illinois, which is basically being run by a close an ally, a political operative that's a close ally of Governor Pritzker. It's presumed that the governor could financially support that eventually to support Stratton's campaign. But so far, we haven't seen any significant movement on that, and there were no reports filed on that just yet. But that's going to be something to look for, because that's probably going to be the only way that Lieutenant Governor Stratton is going to be able to compete in this race, at least from a financial sense, because Congressman Krishnamurthy, spent years building up his campaign bank account, and it is paying dividends right now.
Okay. Well, finally, I did want to talk a little bit this week about the federal government shutdown and how that's impacting people here in Illinois. Open enrollment for people who buy health insurance on the Affordable Care Act marketplace begins November 1st, which is actually just around the corner. Currently, nearly 500,000 people in Illinois are covered by ACA marketplace plans. The cost of those plans is expected to skyrocket next year, doubling, tripling, or even quadrupling in some areas of the country. That's because the enhanced tax credits that Congress approved during the pandemic are set to expire at the end of this year. This is a central issue in the federal shutdown. Democrats in Congress are refusing to go along with any new federal budget or even a continuing resolution unless those subsidies are restored. Congress approved those enhanced subsidies during the pandemic to get more people insured. That was during an unprecedented public health crisis when millions upon millions of people were being hospitalized for a highly contagious virus. They're being eliminated under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That was President Donald Trump's big domestic policy bill that Congress approved this summer. This is all happening at the same time that Illinois is launching its own state-based insurance exchange called Get Covered Illinois. I spoke this week with Insurance Director Ann Gillespie, a former state senator who pushed through the legislation to launch a state-based exchange back in 2013. Here's a little bit of what she had to say about that situation.
90% of the enrollees on Get Covered Illinois get tax subsidies of some sort. Mm-hmm. We are expecting a potential 30% drop in people that are going to be able to afford coverage. But we're really encouraging people, don't walk away. Come and talk to a navigator. Make an appointment to talk to a navigator because there are over 1,100 plans that we're going to be offering on the marketplace. There might be an option that will be affordable for you. And so we really want people to come in, talk to a navigator, and see what we can do to try to help.
You can read more about the health insurance situation on our website, capitalnewsillinois.com. Meanwhile, that's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. Thanks to Brenden Moore and Ben Szalinski for being here this week. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.